The airport buzzed with the usual mix of excitement and stress. 16-year-old Zoe stood at gate B42, her fingers nervously tapping the boarding pass in her hand. This was her first time flying alone, and the butterflies in her stomach wouldn't settle down. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, adjusting the backpack on her shoulder. Her grandmother was waiting in Atlanta, and the thought of spending 2 weeks away from the city made the nervous journey worth it. Gate B42 was packed. A storm had rolled through earlier that morning, and now flights were backed up like cars in rush-hour traffic. People sat on the floor against walls, sprawled across rows of seats, all wearing the unmistakable look of travel fatigue. The air felt heavy with impatience. Behind the counter stood Tom Wilson, a gate agent who had been on his feet for nearly 12 hours. His shift should have ended 3 hours ago, but the storm had thrown everything into chaos. His tie hung loose around his neck and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The constant stream of complaints from passengers had worn his patience paper thin. "Attention passengers on Flight 4872 to Atlanta," Tom announced over the PA system, his voice carrying the flatness of someone who had repeated the same information too many times. "We will begin boarding in approximately 15 minutes. Please have your boarding passes ready. We'll start with our premium members, followed by families with small children, then continue with our group numbers." Zoe glanced down at her boarding pass, trying to find her group number. The ticket looked different from the sample her father had shown her during their flying prep talk last night. Where was she supposed to look? Group 2? Group 5? She couldn't find it. Nearby, a businesswoman in a sharp suit checked her watch for the third time in as many minutes. An elderly couple shared a bag of pretzels, and a mother tried to entertain her toddler with a colorful app on her phone. Zoe approached the counter, waiting for a moment when Tom wasn't speaking to someone else. "Excuse me," she said politely, when there seemed to be a break. "I can't find my group number on my boarding pass. Could you help me?" Tom didn't look up from his computer. "Just listen to the announcements like everyone else. I'll call each group clearly." "I understand, but Next, please." Tom cut her off, motioning to the businessman behind her. Confused and a little hurt, Zoe stepped aside. Maybe she had missed something obvious. She studied her boarding pass again, turning it over and squinting at the small print. Nothing made it clearer. The PA system crackled again. "We are now boarding our premium members and those needing special assistance." People moved forward, creating a line that snaked through the waiting area. Zoe watched carefully, trying to figure out when she should join. Several minutes passed as Tom scanned tickets, and the line slowly moved forward. "Now boarding group 1, Tom announced. More passengers stood and joined the queue. Zoe bit her lip. What if she missed her boarding group? What if the plane left without her? Her father was already worried about her flying alone. She couldn't mess this up. She approached the counter again, waiting for a moment when Tom seemed less busy. "I'm sorry, but I really need help figuring out when to board," Zoe said, her voice a little shaky now. "This is my first time flying alone, and I can't find my group number." Tom looked up, irritation clear on his face. The lines around his mouth deepened. "Young lady, I already told you to wait. I'm calling the groups one by one, just listen." "But that's the problem. I don't know which group I'm in," Zoe explained, holding out her boarding pass. "Could you just tell me where to look for my group number?" The line behind her was growing. A few people sighed loudly, checking their watches and phones. Tom's jaw clenched. "Step aside. You're holding up other passengers who actually listen to instructions. Please, I just need..." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Tom reached across the counter and pushed Zoe's shoulder, hard enough that she stumbled backward. His face was twisted with frustration as he raised his voice. "You need to learn to listen when adults are speaking. Get back in line and wait your turn like everyone else." The gate area fell silent. Zoe froze, her eyes wide with shock and humiliation. Her shoulder stung where Tom's hand had made contact. She couldn't believe what had just happened. A woman nearby gasped. "Did you see that? He just put his hands on that child." Another passenger was already holding up his phone, recording. "Not cool, man. Not cool at all. Tears welled in Zoe's eyes as she stood rooted to the spot. She'd never been treated like this before, especially not by an adult who was supposed to help her. A tall man in a business suit stepped forward. "Young lady, are you okay?" When Zoe nodded shakily, he turned to Tom. "Sir, that was completely inappropriate. You can't put your hands on a passenger, especially not a minor." Tom's face paled slightly as he realized others had witnessed his actions, but the stress and exhaustion of the day had pushed him beyond rational thought. "She wasn't listening to instructions. I've said the same thing a dozen times today. I'm just trying to do my job." By shoving a teenage girl, a woman in a red coat joined in. "I'm reporting this. What's your employee ID number?" Tom's defenses rose higher. "She was disrupting the boarding process. Everyone's already frustrated with the delays. I'm doing the best I can here." Meanwhile, Zoe had backed away from the counter, fumbling in her pocket for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out and dialed. "Dad?" Her voice cracked. "Something happened. The gate agent, he pushed me when I asked for help." On the other end of the line, Anthony Bennett, CEO of Skyline Airline's parent company, felt his blood run cold. "He did what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. In the boardroom of Skyline's headquarters, executives shifted uncomfortably as they watched their boss's expression change from focused to furious in seconds. "Are you hurt?" Anthony asked his daughter, already rising from his chair and signaling to his assistant. "Where exactly are you right now?" As Zoe explained through tears what had happened, more passengers gathered around her, some offering tissues, others filming the ongoing confrontation at the counter, where Tom was now arguing with several angry travelers. "Don't worry about your flight," Anthony said, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "I'm going to make some calls right now. Stay on the phone with me." The other passengers couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see the shift in Zoe's expression, from humiliation to a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. A security officer arrived at the gate, summoned by another airline employee who had witnessed the commotion. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, looking between Tom and the crowd of upset passengers. "This employee shoved a teenage girl," said the businessman who had first stepped in. "It was completely unprovoked. Several of us saw it happen." Tom's face had gone from pale to red. "That's not what happened. She was disrupting the boarding process after I'd already asked her to wait." "I have it on video," said another passenger, holding up his phone. "You clearly pushed her." As the security officer tried to get control of the situation, no one noticed the series of text messages lighting up the phones of several senior airline staff members throughout the terminal. Zoe stood apart from the crowd, still on the phone with her father. "Dad, you don't need to make a big deal about this," she said quietly. "I just want to get on my flight to Grandma's." "This is already a big deal," Anthony replied, his voice controlled but firm. "No, one puts their hands on my daughter. No one puts their hands on any passenger. Trust me, this needs to be addressed." What Tom didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the storm that had delayed flights all morning was nothing compared to the one that was about to break over gate B42. As the security officer took statements from witnesses, two men in suits appeared at the far end of the terminal, walking with purpose toward the gate. One was speaking urgently into his phone, the other scanning the crowd with sharp eyes. The clock on the wall read 2:17 p.m. In the next 30 minutes, everything would change, for Tom, for Zoe, and for the airline itself. The security officer at gate B42 was trying his best to calm the situation. His name badge read Officer Chen, and he had been working at the airport for over 15 years. He'd seen all kinds of tensions flare up at gates, missed flights, lost luggage, delayed departures, but a gate agent putting his hands on a teenage passenger, that was new territory. "Everyone, please step back and give me some space," Officer Chen said, his voice firm but not unkind. He turned to Zoe, who was still clutching her phone. "Are you all right, miss?" Zoe nodded, though her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm okay. He just pushed my shoulder." "She's exaggerating," Tom interrupted from behind the counter. I barely touched her. She was holding up the entire boarding process after I'd already told her to wait. Several passengers immediately protested. That's not what happened. I saw you push her. She was just asking a question. Officer Chen held up his hands. One at a time, please. I need to take statements from everyone involved. He turned to the passenger who had mentioned having a video. Sir, could I see that recording, please? The man, wearing a navy blazer and glasses, stepped forward with his phone. I started recording right after he raised his voice the first time. I got everything. Tom's face drained of color as Officer Chen watched the video. The footage clearly showed him reaching across the counter and shoving Zoe's shoulder, hard enough that she stumbled backward. There was no mistaking it for a gentle touch or a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Zoe had moved to a quieter corner of the gate area, still on the phone with her father. Dad, people are making such a big scene, she whispered. Everyone's staring at me. Just stay calm, Anthony replied. His voice was level, but anyone who knew him well would recognize the controlled fury beneath his words. I've made some calls. Someone from the airline's management team should be there very soon. You didn't need to do that, Zoe said, embarrassed. I don't want special treatment just because. This isn't about special treatment, Anthony cut in. This is about basic human decency and professional conduct. Any passenger deserves better than what just happened to you. As they spoke, the two men in suits that had appeared at the end of the terminal were now approaching gate B42. The taller one, with salt and pepper hair and a grim expression, was William Taylor, the regional director of operations. Beside him walked James Rodriguez, head of customer relations for the airline. Both men moved with the purposeful stride of executives who had just received very troubling news. They arrived at the gate and quickly assessed the situation. The crowd of agitated passengers, Officer Chen reviewing a video on someone's phone, Tom looking increasingly defensive behind the counter, and Zoe standing apart from everyone, phone pressed to her ear. William approached Officer Chen first. I'm William Taylor, Regional Director of Operations, he said quietly, showing his ID badge. We received reports of an incident involving one of our gate agents and a passenger. Officer Chen nodded, relief visible on his face. Yes, sir. I'm still gathering statements, but there appears to have been a physical altercation. We have video evidence. May I see it? William asked. As William watched the video, his expression hardened. James had made his way to Zoe, keeping a respectful distance. Excuse me, he said gently. Are you the passenger involved in this incident? I'm James Rodriguez from Customer Relations. Zoe looked up, startled. Yes, that's me. I'm still on the phone with my father. Of course. James nodded. Would it be all right if I spoke with him as well? Zoe hesitated, then handed over her phone. Dad, there's someone here from the airline who wants to talk to you. James took the phone. Mr. Bennett, this is James Rodriguez, head of customer relations for Skyline Airlines. I want to assure you that we're taking this situation extremely seriously. There was a pause as James listened. His eyebrows rose slightly. Yes, sir, I understand completely. We'll ensure your daughter is taken care of immediately. Mr. Taylor and I are here personally to handle the situation. Another pause. Yes, sir? We'll move her to the VIP lounge right away while we sort this out. James handed the phone back to Zoe. Your father would like to speak with you again. As Zoe resumed her conversation, James rejoined William, who had finished watching the video and was now speaking quietly but intensely with Tom. There is absolutely no excuse for putting your hands on a passenger, William was saying, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Especially not a minor traveling alone. Tom had moved from defensive to desperate. Sir, you don't understand the pressure we've been under today. The delays, the angry passengers, the non-stop complaints. None of that matters, William interrupted. Not one bit. We handle pressure without resorting to physical contact. That's the most basic expectation of this job. James leaned in to whisper something in William's ear. William's eyes widened slightly before his face settled back into its stern expression. Tom, I need you to gather your things and come with me, William said. We're going to continue this discussion in private. Am I being fired? Tom asked, his voice suddenly small. We'll discuss all of that away from the gate, William replied. James will take over here with another agent who's on the way. As Tom collected his belongings, whispering had started among the passengers. A few were pointing at their phones where notifications about the incident had already begun popping up on social media. Did you see who her father is? I just Googled the name. No wonder those executives showed up so fast. James approached Zoe again. Miss Bennett, we'd like to escort you to our VIP lounge where you'll be more comfortable. Your father asked that we make sure you're taken care of while he makes arrangements. Zoe looked uncertain. What about my flight to Atlanta? Don't worry about that right now, James assured her. We'll make all the necessary arrangements. Your father mentioned he may be coming here himself. He's coming to the airport? Zoe's eyes widened. But he's supposed to be in a really important meeting today. James smiled gently. I think he feels this is more important. As they began walking away from the gate, a middle-aged woman stepped forward. Excuse me, she said. I was sitting right next to this young lady when it happened. I'd like to give a statement too. Of course, James nodded. Officer Chen is taking statements from all witnesses, but if you'd like, you can also email our Customer Relations Department directly. I can give you the information. The woman shook her head. I want to make sure this is handled properly. That man had no right to put his hands on her. I have teenage daughters myself, and if someone treated them that way... She trailed off, her eyes flashing with anger. I assure you, ma'am, we're taking this very seriously, James said. You'd better be, the woman replied. Because this isn't just about one bad employee, it's about your whole company culture. In the background, another gate agent had arrived to take over the boarding process. Passengers were finally beginning to board the plane to Atlanta, though many were still distracted by the drama that had unfolded. Some were typing furiously on their phones, sharing what they had witnessed. Meanwhile, in a small office behind the scenes of the terminal, Tom sat across from William Taylor, his hands shaking slightly as the full weight of his actions began to sink in. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done? William asked, his voice calmer now, but no, less severe. Yes, sir, Tom replied, staring at his hands. I shouldn't have touched her. I was at the end of my rope. 12 hours on my feet, constant complaints, delays we can't control. That's still no excuse, William said. But that's not even the whole story here. Tom looked up confused. What do you mean? William leaned forward slightly. The young woman you pushed? Her name is Zoe Bennett. Her father is Anthony Bennett. Tom's brow furrowed. Should I know that name? You should, William said. Anthony. Bennett is the CEO of Global Air Partners. The color drained from Tom's face. Global Air Partners had acquired Skyline Airlines just 6 months ago. Anthony Bennett wasn't just some important businessman. He was essentially Tom's boss's boss's boss. I had no idea, Tom stammered. But that doesn't change anything, right? I mean, I shouldn't have pushed any passenger, regardless of who they are. That's absolutely correct, William agreed. And it speaks well of you that you recognize that. But the reality is, this incident is about to become much more high profile than it might otherwise have been. In the VIP lounge, Zoe sat in a plush chair, a cup of hot chocolate cooling on the table beside her. A kind flight attendant named Lisa had brought it to her, along with a small plate of cookies that remained untouched. Is there anything else I can get for you? Lisa asked. Zoe shook her head. No, thank you. I guess I'm still processing what happened. That's completely understandable, Lisa said. What that gate agent did was wrong. It doesn't matter who your father is or isn't. No one should be treated that way. Zoe looked up, surprised by Lisa's directness. Thank you for saying that. I keep thinking maybe I did something wrong, that I wasn't clear enough or that I was being annoying. You weren't, Lisa assured her. You were asking for help, which is exactly what our staff is there for, especially for young people traveling alone for the first time. Outside the lounge, the airport continued its rhythm of arrivals and departures. Passengers rushed to gates, reunited with loved ones, said tearful goodbyes. Most were unaware of the small drama that had unfolded at gate B42, but in the offices of Skyline Airlines, phones were ringing nonstop. The video had gone viral. Skyline Shove was trending, and somewhere above the clouds, on a private jet that had changed course mid-flight, Anthony Bennett was preparing for a very different kind of business meeting than the one he had planned for that day. Tom sat in the small office, the reality of his situation sinking in like a stone dropped in deep water. The room felt too warm, the walls too close. Across from him, William Taylor watched with an expression that mixed disappointment with something else. Concern, perhaps, though not for Tom's career. On the table between them, a laptop showed the paused video of Tom pushing Zoe Bennett. "Play it again," William said quietly. Tom's stomach twisted as William pressed play. The footage was only 15 seconds long, but watching it felt like an eternity. There he was, face twisted with frustration, reaching across the counter and shoving a teenage girl hard enough to make her stumble backward. The worst part wasn't even the physical action, it was the look on his face, the clear contempt in his expression. "I don't even recognize myself," Tom whispered, more to himself than to William. The door opened, and James Rodriguez entered with a woman Tom recognized as Diane Howard from Man Resources. Her usually friendly face was grave as she took a seat next to William. "Tom," she began, her voice professional but cool, "I've reviewed the security footage from multiple angles, as well as the passenger video that's circulating online." "Online?" Tom's head snapped up. "It's already online?" James nodded grimly. "It's trending on several platforms. Her Skyline Shove has over 20,000 mentions in the last hour." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Nevertheless, it did happen," Diane said. "And now we need to address it properly." She placed a folder on the table. "This is a formal notice of administrative leave, effective immediately. You'll continue to receive your base pay while we conduct a full investigation, but you are not to return to work or contact any Skyline employees about this matter until the investigation is complete." Tom nodded numbly, staring at the folder. "There's something else you should be aware of," William added. "The Bennett family has not yet indicated whether they intend to press charges, but it's a possibility you should prepare for." "Criminal charges?" Tom's voice cracked. "For pushing someone?" "For assaulting a minor," Diane corrected him gently. "Which is how this could be classified, especially given the clear video evidence." Tom buried his face in his hands. How had a normal workday turned into this nightmare? Just 12 hours ago, he'd been having coffee with his wife, complaining about the early shift. Now his career might be over, his reputation destroyed, and he could potentially face criminal charges. "I need to speak with my union rep," he said finally, looking up, "and probably a lawyer." "That's your right," Diane agreed. "We'll provide you with all the necessary contact information." William closed the laptop. "Tom, I have to ask. In your 12 years with Skyline, has anything like this ever happened before? Have you ever touched a passenger inappropriately or lost your temper in a similar way?" Tom shook his head firmly. "Never. Ask anyone. I've always been professional. I've won customer service awards. This wasn't me." He paused, struggling to find the words. "I know it sounds like an excuse, but I've been going through some personal stuff. My mom's sick, and with the overtime and the stress, I just snapped. But that's not who I am." Diane made a note in her file. "We'll take that into consideration. Your employment record will be part of the investigation." James, who had been quietly monitoring his phone, suddenly straightened. "Mr. Bennett's plane just landed. He'll be here in approximately 20 minutes. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Should I meet with him?" Tom asked, his voice small. "To apologize in person?" William and Diane exchanged glances. "That might not be the best idea right now," Diane said carefully. "Mr. Bennett is understandably upset. Let's give him some time with his daughter first." Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge, Zoe had finished giving her statement to Officer Chen. The Komemom process had been less intimidating than she'd expected. Officer Chen had been kind, listening patiently and asking clarifying questions without judgment. "Thank you for your time, Miss Bennett," he said, closing his notepad. "Is there anything else you'd like to add to your statement?" Zoe thought for a moment. "Just that I don't want this to be blown out of proportion because of who my dad is. What happened was wrong, but I don't want anyone to lose their job over one mistake." Officer Chen smiled slightly. "That's very gracious of you. Not many people would be thinking that way after what happened. My dad always says that how you treat people when you have power says more about you than how you treat your equals," Zoe replied. I guess some of his lectures actually stuck. As Officer Chen left, Lisa returned with a fresh cup of hot chocolate. "Your father just landed," she informed Zoe. "He should be here soon. Is there anything you need before he arrives?" Zoe shook her head. "I'm okay, just a little embarrassed by all the fuss." "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," Lisa assured her. "None of this was your fault." Outside the airport, a sleek black car pulled up to the private aviation terminal. Anthony Bennett stepped out, buttoning his suit jacket with one hand while holding his phone with the other. "I want the complete security footage, not just what's circulating online," he was saying. "And I want to know how long that gate agent has been with the company, his complete employment record, any previous complaints." He paused, listening. To the person on the other end. "No, absolutely not. No statements to the press until I've reviewed them personally. This isn't just about Skyline's reputation anymore." Anthony ended the call as he entered the terminal. Despite the circumstances, he moved with the confident stride of someone used to being in charge. The security personnel recognized him immediately, expediting his path through the building. William Taylor was waiting for him near the entrance to the main terminal. "Mr. Bennett," William greeted him, extending his hand. "I deeply regret the circumstances of our meeting." Anthony shook his hand firmly. "Where's my daughter?" "She's in our VIP lounge, perfectly safe. James Rodriguez from our customer relations team is with her, along with one of our senior flight attendants." "And the gate agent?" Anthony's voice was controlled, but there was no mistaking the anger underneath. "Tom Wilson is currently with our HR director. He's been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Anthony nodded. "Good. Now take me to Zoe." As they walked through the terminal, people turned to stare. Whether they recognized Anthony or had simply heard about the incident was unclear, but the whispers followed them like a wave. In the VIP lounge, Zoe looked up as the door opened. When she saw her father, her carefully maintained composure cracked. She stood up and Anthony crossed the room in 4 long strides, wrapping his arms around her. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Zoe nodded against his shoulder. "I'm fine, Dad." "Really? It wasn't that big a deal." Anthony pulled back to look at her face. "It is a big deal, Zoe. No one has the right to put their hands on you, ever." James and Lisa discreetly moved to the far side of the lounge, giving father and daughter some privacy. "I know, but..." Zoe hesitated. "The gate agent, Tom, he looked so stressed. Everyone was yelling at him about the delays, and I think I was just the last straw." Anthony's expression softened slightly. "That's very understanding of you, but it doesn't excuse his behavior." "I don't want him to lose his job because of me," Zoe said. "If he loses his job, it will be because of his own actions, not because of you," Anthony corrected gently. "But we'll discuss that later. Right now, I want to make sure you're truly..." "Okay." Zoe managed a small smile. "I'm more okay now that you're here, but you didn't have to come all this way. You're meeting with the board." "The board can wait," Anthony said firmly. "Some things are more important." Across the airport, in a busy coffee shop near the main concourse, a group of passengers from Gate B42 had gathered. Among them was the businessman who had first stepped in to help Zoe, along with the woman in the red coat and several others who had witnessed the incident. "I can't believe what that gate agent did," the woman was saying, stirring her latte absently, and to a teenager no less. "Did you see the video I posted? It's already got thousands of shares. another passenger said, showing his phone screen. People are going crazy about it, the businessman frowned. I'm all for holding people accountable, but I hope this doesn't turn into some kind of public shaming circus. That gate agent was clearly at the end of his rope. That doesn't give him the right to shove a kid, the woman in the red coat retorted. Of course not, the businessman agreed. But we don't know what else was going on in his life. And did you hear who the girl's father is? The CEO of the company that owns Skyline. That poor gate agent had no idea whose daughter he was pushing. Does, it matter? Asked a younger passenger who had been quiet until now. Would it be okay if she was just a regular kid with regular parents? The table fell silent for a moment. No, you're right, the businessman admitted. It wouldn't be okay regardless. But the fact that her father runs the company means this is going to blow up much bigger than it might have otherwise. Back in the small office, Tom was gathering his belongings. His security badge, now deactivated, sat on the table next to the folder containing his administrative leave paperwork. Diane had left, but William remained, watching Tom with an unreadable expression. What happens now? Tom asked, his voice hollow. You go home, William replied. You wait for the investigation to conclude. You contact your union representative if you haven't already, and... He hesitated, then added, you might want to consider reaching out to a therapist or counselor. This is going to be a difficult time. Tom nodded slowly. I keep thinking about her face, how shocked she looked when I pushed her. I've never done anything like that before. Never. People rarely recognize themselves in their worst moments, William said, his tone softening slightly. But those moments don't have to define us forever. Tom zipped up his bag and picked up the folder. Mr. Taylor, can I ask you something? Honestly? Of course. If she hadn't been Anthony Bennett's daughter, if she'd been any other passenger, would all of this still be happening? The administrative leave, the investigation, everything? William didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Putting your hands on any passenger, especially a minor, would trigger the same response. The only difference is that this incident will receive more public attention because of who her father is. Tom nodded, accepting the answer. Thank you for being straight with me. As Tom prepared to leave through a side exit, away from the prying eyes of passengers and reporters who might have gathered, his phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Are you okay? I'm seeing something online about an incident at the airport. Tom stared at the message, wondering how he could possibly explain what had happened. How in a single moment of lost control, he might have destroyed the career he'd spent 12 years building. In the VIP lounge, Anthony and Zoe were discussing next steps. I don't think I want to get on another flight today, Zoe admitted. Is that okay? Of course it is, Anthony assured her. We can go home and you can fly out tomorrow if you still want to. Or we can both go see Grandma together in a few days, when things settle down. Zoe smiled, relieved. I'd like that. Going together, I mean. But what about all this? She gestured vaguely, encompassing the situation they found themselves in. Anthony's expression turned serious. I need to meet with the Skyline management team. Not as your father, but as the CEO of Global Air Partners. What happened today wasn't just about you. It was a failure of training, of management, of company culture. And that's something I need to address. Will you tell me what happens? Zoe asked. With Tom, I mean. Anthony studied his daughter's face, recognizing the genuine concern there. Yes, I will. And I promise to consider what you've said about not wanting him to lose his job. Your compassion does you credit, Zoe. As father and daughter prepared to leave the VIP lounge across the airport, Tom Wilson stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, squinting against the glare. The weight of what had happened and what was still to come pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Inside the terminal, passengers continued to board their flights, most unaware of the small human drama that had unfolded at gate B42. But for those directly involved, nothing would be quite the same again. Anthony Bennett had been in countless high-stakes business meetings throughout his career. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced hostile boards, and navigated complex mergers. But as he sat at the head of the conference table in Skyline Airlines' executive suite, he felt a different kind of pressure. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Around the table sat Skyline's leadership team, CEO Patricia Reynolds, COO Michael Chen, Legal Director Stephanie Washington, HR Director Diane Howard, Regional Director William Taylor, and Head of Customer Relations James Rodriguez. The tension in the room was palpable. No one had touched the coffee or pastries arranged in the center of the table. "Thank you all for meeting on such short notice," Anthony began, his deep voice filling the room. "I think we all understand why we're here." Patricia Reynolds, a formidable woman in her late 50s who had led Skyline for the past 8 years, leaned forward slightly. "First, Mr. Bennett, let me say how deeply sorry we are for what happened to your daughter. It was completely unacceptable, and we take full responsibility." Anthony nodded, acknowledging her words. "I appreciate that, Patricia. And please call me Anthony. We've known each other long enough to drop the formalities, especially today." He opened a folder in front of him, containing printed copies of emails, social media posts, and news articles about the incident. In just a few hours, Current Skyline shove had become a national trending topic. The video had been viewed over 2 million times. "What happened to Zoe was inexcusable," Anthony continued. "But I'm not sitting here today just as her father. I'm here as the CEO of your parent company, and we need to talk about what this incident reveals about Skyline's operations." Michael Chen, the COO, shifted uncomfortably. "We've already placed the employee on administrative leave pending investigation. We're prepared to terminate his employment immediately if that's what you feel is appropriate." Anthony looked at him steadily. "And what do you think is appropriate, Michael?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Well, I assumed you'd want him fired," Michael admitted. Anthony leaned back in his chair. 6 months ago, when Global Air Partners acquired Skyline, I promised that we would maintain your operational independence. I said we wouldn't micromanage your decisions. I meant that then, and I mean it now." He stood up and walked to the window, overlooking the tarmac where planes taxied back and forth in the late afternoon sun. "My daughter told me something interesting," he continued, still looking out the window. "She said she doesn't want Tom Wilson to lose his job over one mistake." He turned back to face the room. "Zoe has more compassion at 16 than many adults I know, and it made me think, what if this incident isn't really about one employee having a bad day? What if it's a symptom of something larger?" Stephanie Washington, the legal director, cleared her throat. "Mr. Bennett, Anthony, from a legal standpoint, terminating Mr. Wilson would be the cleanest solution. It sends a clear message that we don't tolerate this behavior, and it might help mitigate any potential lawsuit." "Are we expecting a lawsuit?" Anthony asked bluntly. Stephanie looked surprised. "Well, no. I assumed you wouldn't pursue legal action since you're essentially suing yourself as the owner of Skyline, but the public might expect it." "I'm not interested in what the public expects," Anthony replied. "I'm interested in doing what's right, and I'm not convinced that firing Tom Wilson is the answer." The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances. Diane Howard, the HR director, was the first to speak. "If I may, Tom Wilson has been with Skyline for 12 years. His performance reviews have been consistently positive. He's received customer commendations and has no previous disciplinary issues. What happened today was completely out of character." "Do we know why?" Anthony asked. William Taylor nodded. "We've started putting together a picture. Tom was on his 12th hour of what should have been an 8-hour shift. The storm delays created a situation where we were short-staffed across multiple gates. He's also dealing with some personal issues. His mother was recently diagnosed with cancer, and he's been working overtime to help with medical bills." Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "None of that excuses putting hands on a passenger, especially a teenage girl." "Absolutely not," William agreed quickly. "But," Anthony continued, "it does suggest that there might be systemic issues we need to address. Staffing levels, overtime policies, support systems for employees dealing with personal crises, training for high-stress situations." He returned to his seat at the head of the table, I want a complete audit of Skyline's operations, with special attention to employee well-being and customer service protocols. I want to know how we can prevent this from happening again, not just by punishing one employee, but by fixing the underlying problems. Patricia Reynolds looked both surprised and impressed. That's not what I expected you to say. Because you thought I'd be out for blood? Anthony asked with a slight smile. If Tom Wilson had hurt my daughter, physically hurt her, maybe I would be. But what happened was more about dignity than physical harm. And firing him won't restore anyone's dignity, not Zoe's, not his, not Skyline's. James Rodriguez, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke up. What about the public response? The video is everywhere. People are calling for Wilson's head on social media. Some are even calling for boycotts of Skyline. Anthony nodded. That's a valid concern. Stephanie, I want your team to draft a public statement. Be honest about what happened. Acknowledge that it was wrong, but don't throw Wilson under the bus. Say that we're using this incident as a catalyst for a comprehensive review of our practices. Stephanie made a note. And should we mention your relationship to the passenger involved? Anthony considered this. Yes, but downplay it. This isn't about me or my daughter. It's about how we treat all our passengers, regardless of who they are or who their parents might be. Across town, in a modest suburban home, Tom Wilson sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. The screen showed dozens of missed calls and text messages from colleagues, from friends, from reporters who had somehow gotten his number. He had turned on the TV briefly, only to see his own face on the local news, alongside the viral video clip of him pushing Zoe. His wife, Karen, placed a cup of tea in front of him. You should drink something, she said gently. Tom looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. How can you even stand to be in the same room with me? I'm all over the internet, being called every name in the book. The neighbors probably think they're living next door to a monster. Karen pulled up a chair and sat beside him, taking his hand. Because I know you, Tom. I know this isn't who you are. You made a terrible mistake, but one mistake doesn't define your whole life. It might define the rest of my life, Tom said, bitterly. Who's going to hire me after this? Oh, aren't you that guy who shoved a teenage girl at the airport? My career is over. We don't know that yet, Karen insisted. The investigation is still ongoing, and regardless of what happens with your job, we'll get through this, together. Tom squeezed her hand, grateful for her support, even as he wondered if he deserved it. Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Tom froze, his heart racing. If that's a reporter, Karen stood up. I'll handle it. She went to the door and peered through the peephole. Outside stood a woman in a business suit, alone. Not obviously a reporter, but definitely not someone Karen recognized. Can I help you? Karen asked through the door. Mrs. Wilson? My name is Diane Howard. I'm the HR director at Skyline Airlines. I was hoping I could speak with your husband. Karen hesitated, then opened the door slightly, keeping the security chain in place. Why are you here? Tom already has all the paperwork for his administrative leave. Diane nodded. This isn't about that. There have been some developments I thought Mr. Wilson should hear about in person rather than over the phone. Karen studied, her face trying to gauge if this was good news or bad. Finally, she closed the door, unhooked the chain, and reopened it. Come in. He's in the kitchen. When Diane entered the kitchen, Tom stood up abruptly, his face pale. Ms. Howard, I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. Please sit down, Mr. Wilson, Diane said, her tone professional but not unkind. I've just come from a meeting with the executive team, including Anthony Bennett. Tom sank back into his chair. And, am I fired? No, Diane replied. At least, not yet. Tom and Karen exchanged confused glances. I don't understand, Tom said. After what I did, after the video went viral, how am I not fired? Diane placed her briefcase on the table and took out a folder. Mr. Bennett has decided to Take a different approach. He believes your actions today were symptomatic of larger issues within Skyline. Staffing shortages, inadequate support systems, insufficient training for high-stress situations. She opened the folder and slid a document across to Tom. This is a modified administrative leave agreement. You'll remain on paid leave for the next 30 days while Skyline conducts a comprehensive operational audit. During that time, you'll be required to complete 40 hours of conflict resolution and customer service training and attend 8 sessions with a company-provided therapist to address stress management. Tom stared at the document in disbelief. I don't understand. Why would he do this? I pushed his daughter. Mr. Bennett made it clear that he's approaching this situation not just as Zoe's father, but as the CEO of Global Air Partners, Diane explained. He believes that firing you would be the easy solution, but not necessarily the right one. He's more interested in preventing similar incidents in the future by addressing the root causes. Karen, who had been standing behind Tom's chair, placed her hands on his shoulders. That's remarkably understanding of him. There are conditions, Diane continued. After the 30 days, there will be a formal review. If you've completed all requirements satisfactorily, you'll be eligible for reinstatement, but not in a customer-facing role, at least not immediately. There will also be a final disciplinary warning placed in your file. Any further incidents would result in immediate termination. Tom looked down at the agreement, trying to process what this meant. And if I don't sign? Then the original administrative leave continues while we complete the standard investigation, which would likely result in termination given the clear video evidence, Diane said matter-of-factly. Tom picked up the pen Diane had placed beside the agreement. Can I ask one thing? Was this really Mr. Bennett's idea, or is this some kind of PR strategy? Diane considered the question. I was in the room, Mr. Wilson. This came directly from him. He specifically mentioned that his daughter expressed concern about you losing your job over one mistake. It seems compassion runs in their family. Tom felt a lump form in his throat. The teenager he had shoved was advocating for him to keep his job. The irony wasn't lost on him. With a slightly shaking hand, he signed the agreement. Back at Skyline headquarters, Anthony was concluding the meeting with the executive team. I want daily updates on the operational audit, he told Patricia and Michael, and I want to see the preliminary findings within a week. As the team gathered their materials, Stephanie Washington approached Anthony privately. This is an unusual approach, she said quietly. Most executives in your position would distance themselves from the problem employee as quickly as possible. Anthony studied her for a moment. In my experience, Stephanie, the easy path is rarely the right one. Firing Tom Wilson might satisfy the Twitter mob, but it wouldn't solve the real problems. And it certainly wouldn't teach my daughter anything about leadership or compassion. You're thinking about what this teaches Zoe? Stephanie asked, surprised. Anthony nodded. Everything I do, she watches and learns from. Today, she saw someone lose control and resort to physical intimidation when stressed. I want her to also see that real leadership isn't about punishment. It's about improvement. It's about making things better for everyone, not just making yourself feel better by firing someone. Stephanie smiled slightly. That's not the typical CEO perspective. Maybe more CEOs should be parents first, Anthony replied. Speaking of which, I need to get back to my daughter. We have a flight to catch tomorrow. As Anthony left the meeting, his phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Dad, is everything okay? Are you almost done? He typed back quickly. Just finished. On my way. Everything's going to be fine. And as he walked through the corridors of Skyline headquarters, Anthony believed those words. Things weren't perfect. There was still much work to be done, both with the company and with helping Zoe process what had happened to her. But they were on the right path. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the airport tarmac. Planes continued to take off and land, carrying thousands of passengers to their destinations. Within one of those metal tubes in the sky, a story might be unfolding, a small human drama like the one that had played out at Gate B-42. But perhaps, Because of what had happened today, the next story would have a different ending. 3 months passed like a slow-moving river, carrying away the sharp edges of what had happened at Gate B42. Summer turned to fall, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves. For most of the world, the viral video of a gate agent shoving a teenage girl had faded from memory, replaced by newer outrages and scandals. But for those directly involved, the ripples continued to spread. On a crisp October morning, Zoe Bennett sat in the back of her father's car as they drove to Skyline Airlines headquarters. She stared out the window, watching the city pass by in a blur of concrete and glass. "Nervous?" Anthony asked, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. Zoe smoothed her hands over her navy blue skirt. "A little. I've never spoken to a whole roomful of executives before." "You'll be great," Anthony assured her. "Just speak from the heart, like we practiced." The truth was, this had been Zoe's idea. 3 weeks after the incident, she had approached her father with a proposal: a youth advisory panel that would provide input on Skyline's customer service approach, particularly for young travelers. Anthony had been surprised, but impressed, by her initiative. "I don't want what happened to me to just be some viral video that everyone forgets," she had explained. "I want it to actually make things better." Now, as they pulled into the executive parking garage, Zoe felt the weight of that commitment. Would anyone really listen to a 16-year-old's ideas about airline customer service, even if her father was the CEO of the parent company? "Remember," Anthony said as they walked toward the elevator, "you earned this opportunity. Not because of who I am, but because you had the courage to turn a negative experience into something positive." Zoe nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, Dad. I'm ready." Upstairs in Skyline's main conference room, 20 people were gathered around a large table. Patricia Reynolds sat at the head, with her executive team spread throughout the room. Also present were several new faces: consultants brought in for the operational audit, trainers from the new customer service program, and representatives from employee resource groups. When Anthony and Zoe entered, the room fell silent. Patricia stood to greet them. "Anthony, Zoe, welcome. We're honored to have you both here today." As they took their seats, Zoe couldn't help but notice the empty chair near the door. She leaned toward her father and whispered, "Is he coming?" Anthony nodded slightly. "That's the plan." Right on cue, there was a knock at the door. William Taylor opened it to reveal Tom Wilson, looking nervous in a newly pressed suit. He hesitated in the doorway, his eyes immediately finding Zoe. For a moment, no one spoke. The last time these two had seen each other had been during those heated moments at Gate B42. Now, 3 months later, they were about to sit in the same meeting. Patricia broke the tension. "Mr. Wilson, please come in. We're just about to begin." Tom nodded and took the empty seat, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Patricia turned to the group. "Before we start the formal presentation on our operational changes, I believe Mr. Wilson has something he'd like to say." All eyes turned to Tom. He cleared his throat, then finally looked up, his gaze moving directly to Zoe. "Miss Bennett," he began, his voice slightly unsteady. "I've written and rewritten this speech a dozen times, but nothing seems adequate. What I did to you that day was inexcusable. I violated your trust, your personal space, and your dignity. There's no justification for it, regardless of what stress or pressure I was under." He paused, taking a deep breath. "These past 3 months have been transformative for me. The training, the therapy, they've helped me understand not just what I did wrong that day, but how I can be better going forward. I want to thank you and dear Father for giving me the chance to learn from my mistake rather than simply being defined by it." Zoe listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When Tom finished speaking, the room remained silent, waiting for her response. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson," she said finally. "I appreciate your apology. What happened that day was scary and humiliating for me, but I never wanted it to ruin your life. I'm glad you found the training helpful." Tom nodded, visibly relieved by her response. Patricia took over again. Now I'd like to share the results of our 3-month operational audit and the changes we've implemented as a result. She clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind her. First, staffing levels. We've increased our gate, agent staffing by 20%, with particular attention to high-traffic periods and gates known for frequent delays. We've also implemented mandatory break periods. No more 12-hour shifts without proper rest. She clicked to the next slide. Second, training. All customer-facing staff have now completed enhanced conflict resolution training. We've also added a specific module on working with young travelers, which brings me to our special guest today. Patricia gestured towards Zoe. Miss Bennett has kindly agreed to share her perspective as part of our new youth advisory panel. Zoe, the floor is yours. Zoe stood, smoothing her skirt one more time. She had prepared notes, but she decided to leave them on the table and speak from the heart instead. 3 months ago, I was just a kid trying to visit my grandmother, she began. I was nervous about flying alone, and when I couldn't figure out my boarding group, I did what seemed logical. I asked for help. What happened next went viral, but what most people don't know is what happened afterward. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. My father could have demanded Mr. Wilson be fired. He could have sued the airline or gone on TV to shame Skyline. Instead, he asked a question that changed everything. How do we make things better? Zoe gestured to the presentation screen. These changes, the staffing, the training, the new procedures, they're not just about preventing another viral video. They're about creating an environment where both employees and passengers are treated with dignity. She turned slightly to address Tom directly. Mr. Wilson, what you did was wrong, but I believe people can change and systems can improve. That's why I wanted to be part of this panel, to help make flying less stressful for everyone, especially young people traveling alone. As Zoe continued her presentation, outlining the recommendations from the Youth Advisory Panel, Tom Wilson watched with a mixture of shame and admiration. The teenager he had shoved 3 months ago was now helping to reshape company policy. The irony wasn't lost on him. After the meeting concluded, people broke into smaller groups for discussion. Tom found himself standing alone near the refreshment table, unsure of his place in this gathering. Anthony Bennett approached him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Mr. Wilson, Anthony said, offering him one of the cups. I hope you don't mind black coffee. I'm afraid I didn't ask how you take it. Black is fine, sir, Tom replied, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. Anthony nodded toward a quiet corner of the room. Walk with me for a moment. They moved away from the crowd, stopping near the windows that overlooked the city. How has the transition been? Anthony asked. I understand you're working in the training department now. Tom nodded. It's been good, actually. Better than I expected. I'm helping develop scenarios for the conflict resolution training based on real situations gate agents face. My experience, like both the good years and the incident, gives me a unique perspective. That's exactly why I pushed for your reinstatement, Anthony said. Firing you would have been easy. Finding someone who had learned the hard way, who could help prevent others from making the same mistake, that's valuable. Tom sipped his coffee, gathering courage for what he wanted to say next. Mr. Bennett, I've been wanting to ask, was it really your daughter's idea not to fire me? Or was that just something Ms. Howard told me to make me feel less terrible? Anthony smiled slightly. Zoe has a compassionate heart. When I asked her what she thought should happen to you, she said, everyone deserves a second chance if they're truly sorry. But the decision to keep you on in a different role was mine. Because I've found that people who failed publicly and then work to redeem themselves often become your most loyal and valuable team members. Across the room, Zoe was engaged in animated conversation with Patricia Reynolds and several of the consultants. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, her face bright with enthusiasm. She's remarkable, Tom observed. To go through what she did and come out wanting to make things better instead of just getting even. She gets that from her mother, Anthony said, a hint of sadness crossing his face. My late wife always believed in restorative justice rather than punishment. She would have approved of how this all turned out. Meanwhile, in airports across the country, the effects of Skyline's operational changes were already being felt. Gate agents had more support, better training, and more reasonable schedules. A new Young Traveler program had been implemented, with special assistance for children and teenagers flying alone. Customer satisfaction scores were trending upward for the first time in years. The incident at Gate B42 had become a case study in corporate leadership programs and customer service, training nationwide, not because of the viral video but because of what happened afterward, how a moment of failure had been transformed into an opportunity for improvement. Later that afternoon, as Anthony and Zoe drove home from the meeting, Zoe stared out the window thoughtfully. "Do you think he's really changed?" she asked suddenly. "Mr. Wilson, I mean." Anthony considered the question. "I think he's trying to. That's all any of us can do. Recognize our mistakes and try to be better. Some people never even get that far." Zoe nodded. "I'm glad we didn't just have him fired. That would have been the end of the story. This way, the story continues." "That's a very mature perspective," Anthony observed, glancing at his daughter with pride. "Well," Zoe grinned, "I am 16 now, practically an adult." Anthony laughed. "Don't grow up too fast, okay? I'm not ready for that yet." As they drove home through the autumn afternoon, neither of them could have predicted where this journey would lead next. In 6 months, Skyline's Youth Advisory Panel would be featured in a major business magazine as an innovative approach to customer experience. In a year, the training program developed with Tom Wilson's input would be adopted by 3 other airlines. And in 2 years, Zoe would start college with plans to study business ethics, inspired by her experience. But for now, father and daughter were simply grateful that a moment of conflict had led not to more division, but to understanding and growth. The incident at Gate B42 would always be part of their story, a painful chapter but not the whole book. That evening, in his modest suburban home, Tom Wilson sat with his wife Karen at their kitchen table. On the refrigerator behind them, held by a magnet, was a letter, his official reinstatement to Skyline Airlines as a training specialist. "How was the meeting?" Karen asked, pouring him a cup of tea. "Was it awkward seeing her again?" Tom wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "It was healing, actually. Seeing her confident and poised, knowing she's okay. Hearing her talk about making things better instead of dwelling on what happened." And her father? Was he intimidating in person? Tom thought about Anthony Bennett, how he had offered coffee, spoken candidly, treated him with unexpected respect. He was human, Tom said finally. Just a father who loves his daughter and wanted to protect her, but also a leader who saw an opportunity to fix something broken. Karen reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Tom, for facing this, for doing the work, for not giving up." Tom squeezed back, grateful beyond words for her unwavering support. "The therapist said something interesting last week. She said sometimes our worst moments create the opportunity for our best growth. I didn't understand what she meant until today." Outside their window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to either react with frustration or respond with patience. But Tom felt better equipped now, more aware of his triggers and more conscious of his choices. 3 months ago, in a moment of stress and exhaustion, he had made a terrible mistake. He had put his hands on a teenage girl who was simply asking for help, creating a ripple effect that could have destroyed his career and reputation. Instead, because of the uncommon compassion of that girl and her father, the ripples had transformed into waves of positive change. For him, for Skyline Airlines, and for countless passengers who would never know the story behind the improvements they experienced. It wasn't a perfect ending. Tom still had work to do, trust to rebuild, amends to make. But it was a beginning, a second chance he hadn't expected and wouldn't waste. And in that moment, sitting in his kitchen with his wife's hand in his, Tom Wilson felt something he hadn't felt in 3 months: hope.